We're talking about AI companies. We're talking about robots. We're talking about what's going to happen with OpenAI. We're talking about whether we will see some Canadian tech success stories truly pop. Hello and welcome to another episode of the BetaKit podcast. I am Douglas Saltis, editor-in-chief of BetaKit. And if our last episode of 2025 was about the biggest stories of that year, our first episode of 2026 is about the open questions for this year. Tech developments that we're pondering, perhaps low-key predicting, might happen throughout 2026. So, to help me ask, is this a thing, is BetaKit's new managing editor, Sarah Rieger.
Hey, Douglas, how's it going?
Oh no, you said hi at the wrong time.
So sorry.
I got to do the let's dig in thing. It's totally fine. It's the BetaKit podcast 2026. Sound the alarm, Solve 4X is back. The latest season of the Mars podcast is exploring more world-changing ideas. Join journalist Manjula Salvaraja as she talks to the people behind the latest innovations in tech and science, like the astonishing rise in solar energy, the cheapest way to generate electricity. How can Canada take advantage of this power shift? What about ways we could simply eradicate forever chemicals with the flip of a switch? How could BCIs help people with severe disabilities gain more independence? And then there's the question of whether AI can be harnessed for the true benefit of society. Get a jump on the future. Listen to Season 4 of Solve 4X wherever you get your podcasts. Let them know that BetaKit sent you. We're keeping that. We're absolutely keeping that. Hi, Sarah.
Hi.
Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here. Although, do I still count as new? How long do I get to say that for?
2 more podcast episodes.
All right, fine by me.
Is there anything that you want to say first to the BetaKit podcast audience about your reign as managing editor? Maybe who you are, where you came from, what they might know about you and your interests, and what are fueling your massively interesting tech questions that you put in the shared Google Doc that we will be looking at throughout this recording?
Ooh, well, what's fueling them is I am just too online all the time, constantly,
That is why we hired
which
you.
means my brain never turns off, which is a problem. But that's why I love podcasts for, right? Is you can either listen to them to fill that empty space in your head, or just yap on them, like what do I do today? As for an intro for myself, I'm a longtime journalist. I was at the Huffington Post, then at the CBC for a number of years. And most recently, I came from Wealthsimple, where I wrote their TLDR newsletter and co-hosted their podcast as well.
Yes. All very, very exciting things. Also, maybe an important disclosure, because Wealthsimple might come up throughout this episode, but also disclosing that Sarah won like a Webby Award for her work at Wealthsimple.
I did. Very exciting.
Very excited to have her. And like, man, the minute that we could find a way to not have Josh Scott on this podcast for these tech question episodes, we had to make the call.
No way. I love a Josh take.
Josh, they're literally Josh takes. Yes. No, we'll have him back in some form and format. But it's important for us, Sarah, as editor-in-chief and managing editor of the award-winning publication of record for Canadian tech, to set the agenda. And there's no better way to do that than by asking questions, because we certainly don't have the answers. And maybe as we do this, it might behoove us to recap our 2025 questions. Now, these questions both cover Canadian tech and tech from a Canadian perspective, which is kind of the mandate of the BetaKit podcast. They also didn't really come with an expectation of an answer. But in 2025, we actually got a bunch of clear and definitive answers to our questions. So we're going to recap the questions that I posed, along with, yes, one award-winning Josh Scott and absolute favorite of the pod, Madison McLaughlin, 2 reporters at BetaKit. We did a 3-way Spider-Man meme podcast at the beginning of last year, and we covered way too many subjects. So I'm going to try and run through all of the questions that we asked last year that actually had definitive answers, of which there were many. And then, Sarah, stop me when you want to say something smart and or silly about what we thought were our big questions of last year.
I will definitely do that. I was just trying to say, too, I was just re-listening to this episode. And one thing that really struck me was just the different place Canada was in at the time of recording, which I'm sure we're
Oh
going to
man.
get to, but it was a real throwback.
Yeah. Podcasts are time capsules, which is why I love them so much and why I've done so many. But going back to this, especially the end of the year, the last 2 years have been really interesting moments to document the Canadian experiments. And I think I'm gonna even skip right ahead to, I think, the biggest question that we asked last year, which was definitively answered. Um, Smart Alec that I asked what part of the Liberals' innovation commitments would actually make it in 2025, or alternatively, which parts would the Conservatives not kill? Now, you have to remember that I think we recorded that episode on the day that Prime Minister Justin Trudeau was resigning from office. So there was just, to Sarah's point, a very different tenure to politics and Canada at that time.
At that point, I think pollsters were predicting basically a near certain Conservative victory, if I'm remembering correctly.
I think they've been predicting a near certain Conservative victory for like 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
And then Mark Carney, banker with a heart of gold, swept in, won not only the nomination but Prime Minister of Canada, almost a majority. This weird liminal space between minority and majority governments. And boy, howdy, I'll just list the variety of programs that we expected might not come to pass or be killed by an incoming Conservative government. Many of these actually required legislative implementation, which, Finance Minister Freeland resigning, Justin Trudeau resigning, the snap election being called, all of that kind of put into limbo. We were asking about capital gains. We were asking about the Canada Innovation Corporation. We were asking about SDTC absorbing IRAP. We were asking about the STRED patent box, AI regulation, Vicky, open banking. I gotta say, as someone who's usually darkest timeline in terms of how these things pan out, capital gains dead immediately upon Carney taking control of the Liberal Party. Canada Innovation Corporation was actually never mentioned, but hope springs eternal in 2026, because they Liberals did promise that they would turn back to that after an election, and technically that is now. SDTC actually has funding flowing again to clean tech startups in Canada, which is a pretty big win. You can read Josh Scott's reporting on that. He'd cover that beat the last 2 years. Shred reform actually happened in the November budget, which is now a thing that we have to deal with. AI regulation, that one actually didn't happen. That might play a role in some of our 2026 questions. VCCI got recommitted. Open banking has timelines. So, the answer to this question is like a whole hell of a lot of the Liberals' innovation commitments survived 2025 because they're still holding power, which, while I might have predicted that on our 2025 tech predictions episode, that was more of a degenerate gambler's approach to predicting that things might happen.
Just a wild swing.
Sir, when you were saying it was a different time when that episode was recorded, was this specifically what you were referencing? Just how off we were on expecting, I guess, the role of government informing innovation policy throughout 2025?
I think the thing for me, listening back to this, was that we had no sense of A, that the Liberals still had a fighting chance, but B, that Carney would be the Liberal who would win. So we had no sense of which of these policies would live, potentially which would die. And Carney too, we really saw him during the campaign take a bite of Poilievre's lunch on some policies too. So, we saw some Liberal policies maintained, but also some Conservative innovation-friendly policies, get carried through as well.
Yeah, it's a real mixed bag of things that he put a gun to that were Liberal policies and then kept and has moved forward. Again, I'd written this at the end of 2024 about kind of the Trudeau era's failed Liberal innovation policy, mostly because they just promised a bunch of things that they didn't deliver on. It wasn't even necessarily bad policy. It was just this endless string of commitments that never saw fruition. a lot of what Carney's bringing forward was stuff on their agenda, and it's actually happening now. It will be interesting to see throughout this year if, like some of the AI commitments that our new AI minister, Evan Solomon, has been making, which were actually previous Liberal government commitments that are just being executed, if that's something that Carney holds the bag for, or they're able to kind of like blame Trudeau for past policy. But yeah, we have an innovation agenda again, and it's still the Liberal innovation agenda.
Yeah, I'll be really curious to see what happens with that this year. It's one thing to pledge a bunch of money and to kind of promise this stuff is still happening, but it's always, as with the last government too, another thing to actually action that.
Yeah. And that leads very, very well into our next question that we had last year. This was from Madison McLaughlin, who had been doing tons of quantum reporting for us because as the newest reporter on the team, we were like, nobody understands this, Madison, you need to go figure this out. So she had been pounding the pavement, trying to build a little bit of a quantum beat for BetaKit. And she'd asked, will 2025 be the year that people finally understand quantum computing? I actually don't know the answer to that question fundamentally, but I can walk through what happened last year in terms of quantum. We have a quantum company in Xanadu looking to go public through a SPAC deal. We had, again, related to changing governments and new leadership and everything that's happening in the world, this explosion of funding commitments for Canadian defense and defense tech, which has led to increased interest in quantum technology because it has like some dual use purposes when it comes to cybersecurity. If you remember in the 2025 budget, there was about over 80 billion in funding commitments to defense, which included a defense industrial strategy, which we have still not seen yet as of January 2nd, 2026, and hundreds of millions of dollars specifically for the quantum industry through the DIS, including, squeak this out right before the end of the year, new quantum research program to rival the US DARPA initiative, where Xanadu, Nord Quantique, Photonic, and Anion Systems all received up to $23 million each. So, Madison, to answer your question, yes, people finally understand quantum computing in Canada in 2025. It's for Canadian defense and sovereignty, I think.
For me, the thing on like, do people understand something, or is this finally hitting a critical threshold, always manifests in two ways. And this past year, I had non-nerdy friends of mine asking about quantum computing and what it is and how it works. And I also saw the PR emails, in the journalist inbox on quantum computing just explode. Companies promising to do all sorts of things that are definitely not technically possible yet. But
nobody's going to know, Sarah. Nobody's going to know.
Understand is a waffly word.
Yes. Okay, more waffling from us. I'm going to maybe roll through some of the more minor ones. Josh had asked if secondaries would remain hot in 2025. Now, again, I think at the end of 2024, one of our biggest stories of the year was that we are seeing this rise of the go privates and secondary deals fueling a complete lack of IPOs. He was asking, like, will that continue in 2025? Well, the markets still stink. So here's what happened. Global secondary volume hit a new high of 103 billion US dollars in just the first half of 2025.
Wow.
Fueled predominantly by a really, really bad public market scenario. In the Canadian tech scene, we covered a variety of secondaries from 1Password, Jane Software, Cohere, and Wealthsimple, which we're going to talk about a little bit later. So yeah, the answer is that yes, secondaries remained hot. Ties into a really big question that we're going to get to in the next segment of this podcast, a 2026 question. But yes, secondaries were still happening in 2025. What was still happening in 2025 as well? Josh got asking us if centaurs would replace unicorns. Now, this is a very waffly question that he asked, but I think we can maybe say, Sarah, that the conversations about AI bubbles and circular economies that we've been reporting on, I think Trevor Nichols did a really great piece for us in our end of 2025 biggest tech stories, just about how much money is flowing into and around AI first companies. I think that's really diminished the value of a $1 billion valuation versus revenue generation. We're going to talk a little bit about companies in Canada and whether or not they are ready to IPO. I think because of that, you're seeing more companies proud of revenue generation. I think the Globe and Mail just released an update to their initially a 2024 piece, and now they're tracking something like 70 companies that are all generating over $100 million in Canada. Some of them generating like $300 or $400 million USD. So I think, I don't know if the naming is cool. I don't think if people are walking around being like, yo, centaurs rule and unicorns drool, but in uncertain times, cash is king.
Should we define unicorns and centaurs for those who
Oh,
aren't
yeah.
familiar with the centaur label?
Absolutely. If you're unfamiliar with this emerging label, Centaur is just a company that has achieved an ARR, annual recurring revenue milestone of $100 million, usually 100 million USD. We measure all of these things in USD. And that seems to be like the new cool indie hipster cafe replacement to the standard thing, which in like the last maybe 15 years was like, oh my God, this company is a unicorn. They are valued at $1 billion USD. I think as those valuations have been further and further removed from revenue generation or profits, and honestly, like OpenAI is the wealthiest private valued company of all time, but they're nowhere close to making money. I think that kind of broke the idea that $1 billion valuation, you get to IPO, and then you inshitify and generate revenue for your shareholders as the classic process was happening. I think there's just a lot of companies out there in the world that are focused on revenue generation right now, and a lot of Canadian companies that are focused on revenue generation. Okay, what else did we have on our run through?
Clean tech
Oh,
is one that I was
yes.
watching that I thought was interesting.
Talk me through the clean tech stuff, because you were doing the research on this.
Yeah, definitely. So I think there were a lot of outstanding questions about just what would happen with clean tech this year, especially with the U.S. Change in power as well. What was going to happen with funding there? How will it reckon with AI, like all this demand for energy? So we actually saw, according to the S&P, clean tech spending outpaced fossil fuels for the first time ever in history, despite these headwinds. So that's just like a crazy metric that was achieved this past year in terms of overall funding. That being said, though, like some sectors did slow. Spending in Europe actually slowed down quite a bit. China's still on an absolute tear, especially when it comes to batteries, solar panels. So kind of a mixed year in a weird way for clean tech. A lot of U.S. government subsidies went away, but still that demand for power is really just growing, and has to be fueled somehow.
Yeah, I think, and again, emergent theme throughout this podcast. I think Prime Minister Mark Carney was doing some year-end interviews. I think this was with Rosie Barton of the CBC, talking about how clean tech, despite all the pipeline conversations and Alberta and all that, the clean tech is still a huge opportunity for Canada, because the US has basically seceded from that opportunity. Everyone's looking to China. Interesting to see, because this was a real like, oh my God, are we going to see any clean tech movement in 2025 at all, given how the narrative was at the beginning of the year? Well, the narratives can change. We produced a whole issue in 2025 called Most Ambitious, which had a section dedicated to what we called the world savers, a variety of companies working in the clean tech space, or just helping us exist on the planet in a sustainable way. X Atoms, General Fusion, Jetson, New School Foods, Deep Sky, which has been doing some carbon capture work. So yeah, I guess maybe, I don't know if you'd say a healthy year for clean tech or not an unhealthy year for clean tech, and that makes it a win.
Maybe a little healthier than anticipated would be the way to describe it. I found it really interesting watching here in Alberta, because we've seen a pause on some green projects going ahead in the province. We've seen a lot of the oil giants kind of like roll back some of their spending in this sector. But like you mentioned, some of the most ambitious companies kind of targeting carbon capture, geothermal, stuff like that are based out here. So yeah, not like I think a staggering win, but one where we're seeing a lot of companies experiencing growth, even though some others have rolled back a little.
Yeah. And It's always going to be driven by the economics, but seeing that some types of clean energy are getting cheaper and cheaper makes them more viable. And then hopefully, just the market functions as we are all told it should. Okay, a couple more questions here. We'll roll through. Do I do the well, this is one that doesn't have an answer, and then there's one that definitely has an answer. We were asking the question if 2025 was the year that fintech disruptors became incumbents. As you all probably know, I'm a deep fintech nerd at BetaKit, just because I believe in competition and financial access for all Canadians, and that's not something that really happens in the Canadian financial services space. So my question was, would we see companies like Neo Financial, Coho, which is technically still applying for a banking license, Simple, take that evolutionary step from disruptors to incumbent status? I would say that this one is kind of a not quite, but Simple is specifically getting there. They closed the year with additional funding that put them at a $10 billion valuation. They announced that they had doubled their total assets under administration throughout 2025 to $100 billion, which is 3 years ahead of its schedule. This is well past the marker that they had set for themselves as it relates to being truly competitive in the market and then proxy for going public. We've had both Simple co-founders on the BetaKit podcast talking about their plans for that. You might see more of this in 2026. I think we've got one that's reaching incumbent status or like super disruptor, but we didn't necessarily see that throughout the year across the industry. But hey, open banking's coming in 2026. Hope springs eternal.
I do think this is I do think this is something we're going to see really increasing momentum this year, if I can make a little bit of a prediction. And one thing I think that's really driving that is like consumer behavior, especially like the retail investor, kind of post that, meme stock investing craze of a few years ago. And I think also too, with changing hopes around the housing market in Canada and the view of it as like a wealth driver for people, we've really just seen a lot of people throw their money into stocks, and the stock investing environment through the big banks is not great. So you've seen people looking to Wealthsimple, to Questrade, to these newer, more digitally native, I guess, companies. As an opportunity for that. As people are putting more of their money into the stock market and not just their homes, I think we're going to really see the amount of assets under management of these companies just really, really continue to grow.
Absolutely. And one other interesting component that we're probably have been tracking at BetaKit will likely be reporting on 2026. This disruptors versus incumbent battle might not be Canadian company on Canadian company. Robinhood is currently moving through a major acquisition of WonderFi, which would give it boots on the ground here in Canada. So even if this is a disruptors versus incumbent fight, it might not just be, it's Canada versus the world in a couple of interesting ways here.
One other thing we haven't talked about, but just kind of alongside the open banking progress, is stablecoins as well. Crypto, that's I think another reason we see people moving to these kind of more disruptory companies. They're a lot more crypto native than the big banks as well.
Absolutely.
I think something like 1 in 10 Canadians owns crypto right now. I might need to fact check that stat.
This is a podcast, Sarah. You don't have to fact check anything. Just say it with confidence.
Just get to yap. But anyway, the number of Canadians that own crypto is a number that always surprises me. That's really big, and that's really grown in the last couple of years. That's probably going to increase this year as well, even though the market slumped a little bit recently. I don't know, just interest in that, both as a technology and a piece of the investment pie has been growing too.
Yeah. One thing that we're seeing that isn't growing in Canada, sadly, is the level of entrepreneurship. This was a question that we posed in last year's episode because I think it was a BDC report had shown that over the last 20 years, entrepreneurship had significantly declined. And obviously, for a publication like BetaKit, we're very much interested in Canadian entrepreneurship. Posing the question, would we see this continue? I think the answer is pretty definitive, at least along one specific track. There's some new data, and we've covered this in BetaKit. I think we'll maybe include this in the show notes, showing that only 1/3 of high potential startups that were created in 2024 were still headquartered in Canada in 2025. with half of those companies fleeing to the US. Now, high potential startups, I think, are companies that have gotten to the point where they maybe raised $1 million in financing. So it's very, very venture specific. But BetaKit throughout 2025 has reported on so many stories. And we've even had co-founder of Colair here on the BetaKit podcast talking about this gravity well that is pulling them out of Canada to Silicon Valley. I mentioned earlier the state of Canada's job market. I strongly suggest you check out that episode because things are bad for all Canadians in terms of their confidence go forward with their jobs. But Gen Z is particularly unhappy, and it's just so much easier to move now. So yes, the answer is we have seen lower levels of entrepreneurship in Canada. It's very, very sad, and for me, particularly concerning.
Yeah, it's super concerning. I personally, though, I like to be a little hopeful and like look ahead to positive things. There are two things that I'm kind of eyeing as potential bright spots for Canada on this year. If I can be totally Pollyanna-ish for 2
Go for it.
seconds.
I love it.
So the first is I think I've heard from a lot of people that Canada has such a selling point when it comes to our political climate right now compared to some of the stuff, especially re-immigration, that's happening in the US. Obviously we need to like actually attract people here, keep them here to like benefit on that. So there's a lot of work I think for policymakers to do on that front, but that's at least, you know, a kernel of hope.
Yep.
I think we can consider as a country. And the second, and this is a topic I'm kind of obsessed with personally, is I think there's hope for more employees to kind of take over businesses in Canada and to take ownership of them. You know, there are so many reasons that I think people are interested in taking that leap to becoming an entrepreneur, right? Whether it's like rolling layoffs that have been happening in tech, just the idea of like taking control of your own job security is really appealing for a lot of people. And so I'm going to be watching really closely what happens with employee ownership trusts in Canada this year. Basically, Parliament created this in just 2023. They changed some of the rules around getting a capital gains tax credit around this in 2024. But that exemption that they created is set to expire this year at the end of 2026. So basically what this structure is it allows owners of companies to sell to their employees and have them take over the business as opposed to, you know, it being picked up by a larger firm or simply just being shut down when a boss retires. It's a growing trend in like the UK, Scandinavian countries. 10% of business sales in the UK are now under this structure. And this public policy advocacy nonprofit Social Capital Partners in Canada has said they expect to see at least 30 businesses become employee-owned trusts this year. So even though maybe we're seeing less entrepreneurs starting new stuff here, I'm kind of hopeful that we'll see workers like create new versions of businesses by taking them over in 2026 and see that kind of changing. And potentially, who knows, maybe there's a possibility for the government to extend that tax credit there as well.
Yeah, the government's also doing some other work through like BDC. We've covered some funding in support of women-owned businesses where they're looking to retire, making sure that there's like a handoff and transition. I think like when it comes to the state of Canada's economy, all hands are on deck to make sure that productive businesses are, you know, growing, thriving, and sustainable. So I think that's a super cool thing. And obviously this is my specific transition planning as I continue to get more cooked as an elder millennial running BetaKit. It's just like, we just got to hand this off to some fresh blood because I'm too tired. So asked and answered, surprisingly so, our biggest tech questions of 2025. I would not expect that to be a trend given the questions that we're about to roll through for 2026. But in terms of closing thoughts on this, like I've got two, we really, really thought the Conservatives were going to win that election and there was going to be a lot of water falling from that. Boy, howdy, were we wrong. And when it comes to, I don't know, the finer points of questions that the BetaKit newsroom is focused on, capital and frontier tech were two things that we just could not stop thinking about. Sarah, knowing that you are, join the team in 2025 and you are not beholden to these questions, dunk on them. Any takeaways that you have?
They were great questions and all stuff that was interesting to see what happened with this year. And just on even a broader note, it was wild just how much happened this year. Like, I feel like this was one of those, a decade happened in a year moments.
You can see it on my face.
Truly, it was a lot. So I'm kind of just hoping that 2026 will be a little more chill, a little quieter.
I am not confident that that will happen, but we're going to set the stage for it after the break when we come back with our biggest tech questions of 2026. This episode of the BetaKit podcast is presented by QuickBooks on the Intuit platform, built to help Canadian businesses work smarter, more efficiently, and make confident decisions. The QuickBooks on the Intuit platform is an all-in-one connected platform that uses artificial intelligence and human expertise to simplify how you run and grow your business. From managing cash flow and payroll to personalized, proactive insights leveraging the power of AI agents, QuickBooks helps you save time and focus on what matters most. Today, I'm joined by Pooja Sabrin, Regional VP and GM of Canada and Latin America for Intuit, who's going to talk to me about the recently redesigned QuickBooks. All right, Pooja, thank you for joining me. I want to jump right in and have you explain to me, why does this redesign matter? How is it impactful?
So we are really excited today to be announcing the launch of our new, more powerful QuickBooks on an all-in-one Intuit platform. And the reason I'm so excited about it is because of the benefits that it will bring to small business customers. Everything from improved efficiencies, improved insights that can facilitate decision making, as well as automation that can really save customers' time. So what this platform will involve is three main components. So we will be introducing a set of proactive AI agents that will essentially automate a number of different tasks for the small business agents and work in collaboration with human experts while always giving the business owner and or their accountants complete and ultimate decision control. So that's a key part of the benefit. The second benefit is completely, as I talked about, an all-in-one platform. It's a redesigned, more streamlined view that brings all the key or what we call critical jobs to be done by a small business together in one place so that you're preventing having to switch from multiple applications. So anything from customer management, payments, payroll, all the accounting, all in one place. And the third piece is through this one platform, also allowing easy integration to any third-party applications that small businesses are coming in. So truly bringing it all together to then seamlessly collaborate with experts like accounting professionals.
Can we talk about the specific changes that the new QuickBooks offers small businesses?
Why I'm excited is it brings in a combination of proactive AI agents that will really help drive a number of key benefits and efficiencies for our customer, as well as surfacing key insights that improve decision making. And it's all brought in one place with the critical jobs to be done. So the AI agents with human experts and all the key jobs to be done in one platform. And that would include anything from the accounting that a business has to do, payments, payroll, customer management, to make it easy for a small business owner to have it in one.
You know, it's a hard time for a lot of Canadian founders and small business owners right now. I just want to take a step back and have you talk to me about what you saw people experiencing in terms of their workflows, what problems you were trying to help them solve with the redesign.
If I look at one of the biggest challenges small businesses have is time. Right? It's time to focus on what they need to do to drive the growth of their business. They are really bogged down by a lot of operational issues. They're bogged down by working on multiple systems. In our research, we talked about 6 to 9, and sometimes you have small businesses using up to 30 applications. So there's a lot of inefficiency as you switch from system to system, as you have data in multiple systems. So this whole fragmentation of systems, as well as decision fatigue, that really slows small businesses down. And what we are doing with this new launch is helping to facilitate all of these challenges that small businesses face by bringing it and simplifying it into one platform that brings their critical jobs to be done and ultimately gives small businesses what they need: the time, to focus on what really matters and help grow their business.
QuickBooks on the Intuit platform is an all-in-one connected business solution that leverages the power of artificial intelligence and human expertise to simplify how you run and grow your business. From managing cash flow and payroll to delivering personalized insights, leveraging the power of AI agents, QuickBooks helps you spend less time crunching numbers and more time growing your business. Visit quickbooks.intuit.com/CA to see how Intuit QuickBooks can help you. Sarah, because this is your first time on the podcast and we are so happy to have you join BetaKit, I would like to give you the opportunity to go first. And from our totally not collectively paired Google Doc, choose your first biggest tech question of 2026.
I feel like for the biggest, I have to start with the biggest one that everyone probably has. So this is also the most obvious. But just, I'm wondering how much AI spending will grow this year. I think a lot of people have been predicting that Ouroboros, that big spending snake, will gobble up its own tail and
Yes.
we'll see a bursting bubble. Obviously, if that did happen, there would be enormous repercussions to the economy, everyone's pensions, the structure of where investment flows in tech. I personally think that bubble bursting is a little unlikely. So to me, the bigger question then is just how much will the spending grow? Will it peter out a little bit? Will there be a bit of realism injected into the market? And just for context, so the main 4 or 5 hyperscalers spent around $400 billion in 2025 on AI. Are we going to see that surpass $500 billion this year?
Yeah, we're dealing with literally funny money at this point. Again, I'll shout out Trevor Nichols. He did our kind of, we did a biggest tech stories of 2025 series, and he talked about the year that every Canadian startup went AI first. And he was just talking about, I think, you're talking about CapEx from the hyperscalers, just even in terms of like venture capital. I think last year investment in VC investment in AI startups was 50% of all committed globally in 2025. It's just like an ungodly amount of money being put into this machine. I would also suggest checking out Trevor's piece because he tracks how the snake is indeed eating itself. Or is it eating itself, or is it funding itself? Is it the snake is buying itself servers?
Well, I think that's the
compute
question, right? Is how much of this is gobbling up? How much of this is just debt that's changing hands? And 80% of the market growth in the US last year was due to AI spending. So there's no really escaping it either. If you invest at all, if you have a pension, if you have, a group RRSP, you're tied up in this too.
Yeah. Well, that's a wonderful thought. But I'm gonna piggyback on this because I had a question related to this, and I think guys, it's obvious we're gonna have some AI related questions for this. I'm going to do mine because you're going broad, macro, industry-wide impacts of Canadians, their bank accounts. Very, very good stuff. I'm going to just target one organization and poke holes in them. My question is 2026 the year that OpenAI is revealed to have no close?
This is such a good question.
Here's why. Let me just recount some of the things that happened to OpenAI in 2025. OpenAI is paying employees more than any other tech startup in history. Company's stock-based compensation is about $1.5 million per employee on average across a workforce of roughly 4,000 employees. That's more than 7 times higher than stock-based pay of Google in 2003, right before it filed for IPO. The 1.5 million.
This is a good time to ask for a raise, right?
Let me just open up a ChatGPT tab and I will get back to you.
Mm.
It's 34 times the average employee compensation of the 18 other largest tech companies the year before they went public. Again, we said earlier, OpenAI is the most valuable private company of all time, but it also might not turn a profit until 2030. And it could also require another $207 billion in funding to get there.
Also, don't you feel like that $207 billion is a low ball based on
based upon the question that you just asked previously, I do think it's a low ball. I don't know if they get like a 2 for, like, is it a BOGO deal when you are just like getting invested in from NVIDIA for the chips and then spending it on the compute? Like there might be some model efficiencies there, economic models. Meanwhile, on the product front, OpenAI has called another code red in response to Google taking the AI model lead once again. And Sam Altman, CEO of OpenAI, recently told colleagues in, I think, November that Google's recent progress in AI could create some, quote, temporary economic headwinds for our company. Not a great thing to say when you need another $207 billion at the minimum. We've had conversations throughout 2025 on the impacts of AI chatbots on both tech CEOs and a generation of young people who are coming into this the same way that they came into social media. It's very, very bad. OpenAI just happens to be hiring a head of preparedness to mitigate AI dangers. And Sam Altman thinks that job would be stressful, quote unquote. Companies have momentum when they have traction. You can also have momentum when you are tumbling down a cliffside and trying to just like not be ass over tea kettle. I get the feeling that this is a more of a signal of the latter than the former. And I'm just wondering if certainly won't be 2026 the year that people stop quoting Sam Altman with the things that he says. I wonder if it's really the year that they really stop believing in the company and what it can produce.
I could see that. I guess my question is it a tumble or is it more of a stumble? You know, when so much money, so much attention has been poured into something like this, like, is it that just kind of implodes, or is it that it just kind of slowly gets a little more boring, fades? We see some other competitors take the lead a bit.
Yeah. Or perhaps they are just simply too big to fail and they will twirl endlessly towards some new market. I think I was listening to the Vergecast predictions for 2026, and then that play for OpenAI is always there where they just make some major announcement that they've like figured out something with health tech. They can like cure cancer. They pivot to an enterprise market. Revenue generation is there. This is one of the most used apps of all time. There's something there, but it doesn't add up. And I think we are gonna, when you have a leaky something on your car, or like there's a wheel that isn't perfectly aligned, it starts to shake and then the whole vehicle starts to move. And I can just see that this vehicle is shaking.
Out of curiosity, how much do non-tech people in your life use ChatGPT or Sora that you know of?
Oh, that's a really good question. Non-tech people in my life. Do I see non-tech people in my life, Sarah, is maybe another question that is too emotionally fraught for this podcast. I don't think it's gotten to mom level yet, but I also don't think, I think AI use is such, we talk about Gemini, all the platforms that we're forced to use. And if you haven't read Sarah's end of the year piece on enshittification on betakit.com, you should do so now because we talk about this explicitly. All of those platforms that now comprise the internet are all adding AI features. So I think whether or not people are actually, adding ChatGPT to their phone as like a one button press, ask and answer, the way that we were promised Siri or Alexa would be, they're probably starting to use them even if they're not fully sure. So I don't think my mom's doing it yet, but I wouldn't be surprised if the next insert your big tech company here update requires that to happen. Certainly Microsoft wants it to. They'll add Copilot to anything. I think they've added Copilot to this podcast right now somehow.
That's always the question for me with this consumer facing stuff, is how much do we see people seeking it out versus how much are they kind of like forced into adoption of it. So I'll be curious to watch that a bit more this year. I've definitely seen people in my life like really turning to these apps as their primary source of information in some ways, which has been a real interesting shift.
Yeah. One minor addendum to this question, and then we'll close maybe kind of our AI section. I'm going to be paying close attention to how Minister Solomon is using AI, because I have a sub question of this is like, are we going to see effective AI policy from the feds in 2026? The AI task force, the much ballyhooed AI task force, submitted their recommendations before the end of the year. Many of them are just publishing those recommendations online. I guess the government has to use ChatGPT or maybe Cohere, hopefully, to compile and consolidate those. Like, do they use AI to tell them what they should do about AI? AI strategy should be coming next year. The AI privacy bill that was promised at the end of this year was delayed. That might not matter anyways, as what we saw with Bill C-27 and their ADA provision. Canada doesn't really have leverage on this front. Companies can just go to the lowest common denominator jurisdiction. We're already seeing in the States, Trump is trying to ban AI laws at the state level through executive order. We're seeing the Fed's sovereign AI funding get trashed because they're giving money to like Nokia and calling that sovereign. A lot of people that I speak to think that privately Canada's missed its window on AI, and then all of this quantum focus is like the next thing we have to make sure doesn't happen. We've still got AI talent, we've still got Cohere, we've still got the universities, but capturing the value of that seems unlikely because it should have happened 5 years ago. So I don't know. Will the feds be able to offer effective AI policy, and what would that even look like? Is a thing that we're going to track as we also track the spending dollars.
A trickle down of that I'm going to be watching too is on the provincial and even municipal levels. Like BC has its own AI minister now. We're seeing a lot of cities implement AI into their workforces. So whether or not we get effective federal policy, lots of that, like who's picking up your garbage levels of government are going to be integrating this too, which will be interesting to see.
No one's hiring chief digital officers anymore, so you've got to slap the AI label on it. It's like, again, job market's tough. Okay, Sarah, what is your next? We kind of did a 3-parter AI one there, which I thought was very, very good. What's your next biggest tech question of 2026?
I am curious to see if we are going to get some real Starlink competitors this year.
Is so good. This is so good.
So the reason I'm watching this so closely, so Ottawa's aiming to have 98% of Canadians connected to high-speed internet in 2026. But when you look region by region, that is super not realistic for a lot of the country. 15% of Saskatchewan still doesn't have decent internet speeds, 13% of Newfoundland, and basically 100% of none of it. Obviously, Canada's been really relying on Starlink up until this point. We're the second biggest customers after the US. And earlier this year, this Canadian press survey found that Crown corporations or governments in 4 provinces and 3 territories had Starlink agreements. Rogers partnered with it for its satellite text service. And I think, if we want to grow our economy in the ways we're hoping this year, getting everyone online at high speeds is going to be key. Like, internet is really just a utility at this point.
Yeah. This is such a good one because it touches on so many of the levers where we track the intersection of like tech and just Canada. You mentioned the provinces that are doing this. Like, one of our most popular stories of 2025 was Doug Ford emphatically ripping up a Starlink contract at the beginning of the trade war that he should have never signed because he was paying a huge premium to service like 100,000 people with Starlinks. They could have been just much cheaper if they just bought them locally and got a tax credit. We are a very rural country, so this matters. As like someone from Northern Ontario, like it's not easy to get great service. Sarah, you are literally in I think it's called The Last of Us, Alberta. That's where you live. You're just like fighting wild creatures and cellular connectivity at all times.
Yeah, truly, I'm off in the woods. So Starlink is a very hot topic out here, right? There's a lot of neighbors of mine that don't have good access, and the question is always, how can you get it? Especially too, I don't know, we want to grow the economies of places like where I'm living, where you could maybe revitalize a small town, and the best way to do that is to get remote work out there, to get it accessible, and this is really key.
No one wants to come to an office anymore. Make sure that they have good internet elsewhere. It's a really big deal and could be an economic driver for parts of Canada that are not suffering from the transportation, logistical issues, homelessness issues that we're seeing in our major cities post-COVID. How we do this is so important too, because our 2 innovation ministers ago, Minister Navdeep Bains, internet access for rural communities and usually underserved communities was a big consideration for him. There was a lot of IRAP and I think like FedDev funding, like RDA funding that he would put across different markets. But that was always like broadband building. It's so much easier, although there's so many complications to this in terms of environmental considerations and things like that, to just throw up a satellite and leverage that. But also, again, back to our most ambitious issue of 2025, we had a whole section on this emergent space sector that we're trying to build, not only because that's cool, but sovereignty and dual use tech. And we actually have potential competitors here. So it'd be really interesting to see Canada put forth something that allows us to not have to buy anything from Elon Musk ever.
Totally. And like, obviously, too, big American companies are working on this issue as well. Like Amazon is working on a Starlink competitor. But I'll be watching Telesat really closely. They're Canadian. They're expecting to launch a low Earth orbit satellite project this year, this spring, I believe. And there is the possibility of other models too, right? Like, we can throw a link to it in the comments, I'm sure, or in the description. But there was this great Maclean's piece in 2025 on Indigenous nonprofits setting up local fiber networks, so kind of these different piecemeal ways that we can work on getting people online this year.
Awesome. Okay, great question. My question is, will 2026 be the year we see a Canadian tech company IPO again? Now, this is a possible cheat because we know that Xanadu wants to go public, not IPO, but go public through a SPAC, but nothing is guaranteed. There's actually a repeat of a 2024 question because, we've been writing about the IPO window for tech companies being closed for quite a few years. And one of our biggest tech stories of 2024, as I noted before, was more public companies going private again than going public. This ties into the question that was asked and answered last year about secondaries being a fuel for this. As companies are waiting for the IPO market to open up, they are getting secondary capital, cycling through investors, cleaning up their cap table, paying out employees who are sticking around and waiting, because the traditional model of, like, again, $1 billion valuation, IPO, everyone's wealthy, and then Netflix makes a movie about you, just isn't the reality in the post-COVID environment. But last year, we saw a bunch of Canadian tech companies, I think for the first time in a while, seriously talk about IPO. That includes Wealthsimple, who said it explicitly that they want IPO. Which I think is very, very interesting. And I don't know if it will serve them well in what they're trying to do. Cohere actually took a secondary and talked about IPO at the end of the year. Clio has been talking about this for years. Again, they're one of the companies that has been most vocal about, hey, the $100 million ARR revenue milestone that used to be enough to go public isn't what it should be anymore. It's now like 3 or 4. They're already at that. And every time we interview them, they say something about, we're just waiting for the right moment to do this. That moment might be 2026. And then there's literally one, we could be public today password that couldn't be more explicit about how much their investors and leadership want to go public to pay off the massive investments that company has seen. And then I'll just add, again, I cited this growing list of companies at the $100 million threshold, which is the old threshold for IPO. The Globe, Sean Silkoff, a friend of the pod, did a great recap on that. I think at the end of 2025, the US $100 million club now has 77 members in Canada, 25 of whom are above US $300 million. And we should be looking at that pool to see if one might go public. Sarah, again, disclosing that you, up until like 2 months ago, were a Wealthsimple employee. What are your thoughts? Do you think 2026 is the year we're actually going to see the IPO markets open up again for tech?
I think the thing that I've seen a lot of these companies weighing is that their calculations have changed a little bit. I think this used to be really the default, especially in a hot market, right? It was just obviously the next step, obviously the thing to jump to. As we mentioned before, talking about secondaries a bit, is there are other ways to unlock liquidity for employees if that's a need. And I think companies are kind of questioning what would be the benefit of doing this right now. A bad IPO looks really ugly. It puts a lot of pressure on companies to, be transparent in different ways. Like, I think a lot of companies are valuing the nimbleness of kind of staying private as long as they can. Yeah. So I would be surprised to see a big explosion in this in Canada this year, especially just because there are so many headwinds the market is facing overall, the uncertainty around tariffs still, just how is our economy going to be doing broadly. that I'm sure a lot of these companies, even if they do want to eventually IPO, they're probably considering, do we need to right away?
Yeah.
Can this wait? So yeah, it's an interesting question, but I do think just the IPO as a goal has really changed over the last few years.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. And in terms of like that additional work and difficulty, we were just talking about this earlier today before we were recording. There's a list of all the highest paid Canadian CEOs in Canada that is very public company forward, which means it doesn't comprise a lot of Canadian tech companies, because it's like you got Shopify and like Lightspeed and that's it. I'm being facetious. But there is a lot of work in managing this. I also think strategically for some of these companies, beyond the optionality and having alternative choices, is actually might be a bad choice for certain companies, not just from the market conditions, but for what services or companies. We had Xanadu's Christian Wiedbrook on this podcast twice talking about his desire to raise about 200 million USD to continue his frontier tech research in the quantum space, and how he was struggling to do that because he wanted to be Canadian to stay in Canada. Lo and behold, some Canadian federal money shows up for like a Canadian DARPA, and he's choosing to go SPAC, which is, hey, path to liquidity. That's great. You're a publicly traded company. You are opening up the potential to no longer control the direction of your company. And I'm wondering if, like, the first notable Canadian quantum company, D-Wave, is no longer a Canadian quantum company because they moved their headquarters to the US. Will we see a similar circumstance here? I also think, and again, from the Wealthsimple consideration, everything that they are trying to do is rail against the dumb things that the banks do. But there's a reason why the banks do that. It's because they're publicly traded, and like a third of Canada's economy is based upon the dividends that they pay out to the Canadians that own shares in that. If they're a publicly traded company, they're going to have a lot more pressure, even as a profitable company, to drive similar returns, and will likely be measured against that. And I don't understand how being public helps them with their long-term goals. But not every tech company thinks about those long-term goals. Sometimes they just think about cashing in, or the pressures to create liquidity events for investors, employees, founders. So yeah, I think it might happen, but I think there's a cohort of companies that could do it, and then within that, a cohort of companies that should not probably do it.
Yeah, it's always an interesting trade-off, right? Like, even just as someone who is maybe a user of these companies' products, or a market watcher, on one hand, going public offers so much more transparency, but on the other hand, that means companies can't always kind of like take wild swings with their spending, with their choices in the ways that they sometimes can before going public. I had a really interesting conversation on the Wealthsimple podcast last year with the head of TMX Group, which actually runs the TSX, the Toronto Stock Exchange. And while he couldn't name what companies he was talking to, he said that they are always in talks with companies to kind of prep them for going public, just kind of to plan ahead, to think about it. And I would love if he could tell me, and I'm sure he absolutely can't, but just how many companies he's having those conversations with right now. It would be interesting to know what his like Rolodex looks like.
Might be a good little question for us to maybe answer through some additional BetaKit reporting in 2026. I really like that. Okay, Sarah, you've got an absolute banger here. Possibly to close this out, we're just rolling through these questions. So much more efficient when it's just the editors talking and not the reporters.
Let's pat ourselves on the back.
Please give us this question, because I am so excited to dig into it with you.
Okay, this is perhaps our silliest question, but it's also grounded in some real stuff that's happening. And it's
totally
robots. Robots is the question. I'm wondering if home robots are going to take off in some way this year. Last year, we saw some of the silliest videos I've ever seen in my life of these humanoid robots. A lot of them are basically mechanical Turks. Like, they're not really a robot. It's a dude somewhere else puppeting this robot.
They're drones with feet.
Yes, drones with feet
by some poor person in India with an Xbox controller.
So I haven't seen a lot of utility in these yet, but this week LG is debuting a home robot at CES. I'm sure there will be a lot of other companies debuting similar things too. LG already has those wheeled robots you might have seen in restaurants. I've seen them at hot pot places in Calgary, bringing people's dishes to them. But this one will, I think, be a little more humanoid than just that wheeled thing, and it's being marketed for home use. They haven't said yet what features it has. Maybe that will be out as of the time this podcast is out. But the slogan is "Zero labor home makes quality time."
Yeah. I'm not going to say that I'm a Marxist, because I'm not. But I think people who that slogan is for have never read a critique of market forces. Like a labor-free home, that my old boss, Mike Lazaridis, co-CEO of Research in Motion, was very, very successful for many years off the principle that there is no free lunch in physics. At some point, some component of the chain's got to pay for the work or the energy or the time. Same thing happens with labor. Robots aren't free. Somebody's paying for it somewhere. I guess, Sarah, to drill this down, would you be willing to accept a robot into your wilderness home in 2026 to help with the wood chopping and then the fending off against the mutant mushroom zombies, or like any other tasks? Like, would you be an early adopter to this? Because I don't even have a Roomba. Like, I enjoy sweeping the floor as a form of relaxation. I like doing the dishes with some tunes on. I don't see slave robot who could crush me if it fell, or rise up against me if I don't treat it well. Particularly knowing that it's just a person in India with an Xbox controller as in on my like spending list for 2026. But are you open to this? Are you asking this question because you deeply want robots in your home?
Well, I'm gonna air out one of my partnership disagreements here, which is that I love a smart home. I have a little RoboVac. I love changing my thermostat from being in bed and not even standing up and talking to the lights so they turn on and off. My partner sees these things as like forces of, I don't know, horror encroached on our life. So I think there would be some debate if I wanted to bring these in, but I am interested in the utility of these, right? Like, I think about the invention of the washing machine and what that did for especially women, like getting them into the workforce, reducing that domestic labor. I would love things that could take more of the many tasks in my 100-year-old plus home off my list. That being said, am I optimistic of the utility of these yet based on what I've seen? No, it would be really cool, but I see a lot more stories about smart home products crashing out or showing ads than I do ones that are really helpful. And these humanoid ones, I have to say,
you wrote our enshittification article for BetaKit this year, and it was about ads on your Samsung fridge that were driving people to have manic episodes, allegedly. We'll note
allegedly,
that.
Not great.
Like, I'm learning so much about you by podcasting with you. I don't know. I think to your point on like what the dishwasher did, like totally there are benefits that we can achieve through great home utilities. I just think, one, the tech for smart homes is so like Matter is so poor, the interconnection points are so poor, and the like level of like system design you need for your household to make it work is really, really complex, that if you're not starting from the ground up, it's difficult to do. And then if you are, it's like it's embedded into the home, and if that stuff gets outdated, it's tough to update. I think that's going to impede innovation here. And the other thing is, like, I think there's a big difference between having like those smart air purifiers, or like you have to use a humidifier because our house is so dry that it would destroy every musical instrument in my house. Like, we've got a kick-ass dryer that is like way too many features and button sounds and things like that. Like, there's a difference between home appliances that are getting better and taking burden off of us, and then robo slave to do the things that we don't want to do, so we can watch more algorithmically driven, ad supported generative AI slop content online. And I don't want to go that direction. I don't think you do either.
No, maybe
Right?
maybe there's some sort of happy medium here that we'll see introduced. Like I would love a dryer that, like, I don't know, folds my laundry for me while it's in there, or something kind of mid-tier. Not saying the goal is so high to have this robot walking around and doing everything.
Even if it doesn't even have to fold it, just have it not come out of the dryer in one turbo clump would be a huge win. But I don't know. Maybe we'll see it in 2026. You did know that CS is about to start, will be happening by the time people watch or hear this episode. So maybe we will see the robots that we want in our lives in 2026. But like, be prepared for most of next year. They will definitely be controlled by people in India with Xbox controllers.
And you know what? Maybe in the meantime, we'll at least get some other really funny bad robots running into mirror videos. So I'll take that as a runner-up.
We're definitely getting that. We're definitely getting the LOL videos for sure. Okay, I think we did a really excellent job here. These are some really good questions. And again, man, Capital and Frontier Tech, we're talking about like Starlink and Canadian Space. We're talking about AI companies. We're talking about robots. We're talking about what's going to happen with OpenAI. We're talking about whether we will see some Canadian tech success stories truly pop. I think that's a really good portfolio of things to look forward to in 2026. Sarah, I really look forward to us maybe getting back on this podcast throughout the year, talking about some of these stories as they unravel. And then I don't look forward to the beginning of 2027 holding ourselves to account for the questions that we just asked.
Listen, that's a next year problem.
It's definitely a next year problem.
But in the meantime, too, can I say I would love to hear from listeners about what questions they have as well.
Yes.
They want to drop them in the comments.
If you have a big tech question for the year, a couple ways you can send that to us. You can, one, leave it as a comment if you're watching this on the YouTubes. I have no idea if any of the podcasting platforms offer that, but maybe leave a review, a 5-star review, and throw one in there. Yeah, use Spotify. That's a thing too. Or you can send us an email at podcast@betakit.com. We read everything that you send, even if we don't respond. If you've got some really good tech questions for 2026, maybe well, Sarah's here now. It will be her job to try and go answer them throughout the year through BetaKit reporting.
I can't wait. Show us the weird robots you're buying.
Yes, show us the weird robots you're buying. I want to see those photos. Okay, until then, we will be back. We have so many big plans for this podcast in 2026. Maybe some specialty things. We're getting a new studio. We're recording this just from our homes right now, but we're doing some work for our Toronto studio. Big things to come. Look forward to you joining us on that journey. We'll see you on the next one.